Thank you very much, Dave. Thank you for having me as part of this this event. It really is a privilege, and thank you all for being here. It's great to see all of you. And I will say that being in fashion, I have a particular interest in this topic because today, approximately 60% of all clothing that is manufactured is made from polyester, and so more than half of our clothing today is plastic. And that creates particular kinds of problems, particularly when we launder our clothing, because a single garment can release up to 500,000 fibers in a single wash, and many of those fibers end up in our oceans, where they cause all kinds of problems as microplastics. And so this topic, even though I didn't get into fashion and sustainability for it, it's unfortunately become one of the really difficult topics today. And I think the whole topic of plastic is one of those kind of wicked problems that we are having to deal with in the 21st century. And there are no easy solutions, but I think the three amazing speakers earlier pointed the way to many of them. And I was certainly left inspired by all three of you, so thank you. And so I'll start with that very statement. So there is really no silver bullet solution to the issue of plastics. We need to address it and attack it from all fronts: discussion, reduction of use, which some of you also spoke into already, reclaiming material from the environment, responsibility regarding disposal, reuse existing material, and overall rethink our use, finding alternative materials whenever possible. I'll start with a kind of a really broad question, and I ask that you respond to it sort of fairly succinctly, but from your very specific perspectives, because we have three really brilliant and different perspectives in that we have an educator and then someone who works with this material at the level of the city, and then an artist and a designer working with this material, which I think is a brilliant combination of perspectives. But from your perspective, what is the significance and scope of the problem? So, who would like to start?
Sure. So, to me, the significance of the issue, as we describe it, is kind of a global condition we are really talking about. To be honest with you, as soon as a problem comes up, I always look at the opportunity that is providing instead of thinking about the actual problem. So if as soon as you see a problem, there's a solution. And that is more exciting for me for discussion. And that is where I find the most incredible, like the significance of it, finding that solution and trying different methods in order to actually address that solution. So address that problem. So that is where I think the significance of the problem is coming up, the creativity that is generated from that. That's so, maybe that is just because I'm being an academic researcher, that's how I see it. That's the.
Yeah, I'm big support of innovation. I think that's how we're going to have to move forward. And as I said, plastic is everywhere and unavoidable. So that's the significance. This thing that's never going to go away is so much a part of our lives. And the scope, it's global. Plastic is in everyone's lives globally. So what is the innovation that's going to come next? So I was speaking to someone in the audience about how in the past 8 years, this has become more of a visible problem or more of a visible issue. So now people like us are starting to talk about it more. So when is that innovation going to happen? It's starting to happen now. It's starting to happen right out there. That's terrific. Yeah, because I see lots of plastic every day, as you saw in that photo. And that's what I first thought when I heard the scope of the problem. I thought, oh, well, piles and piles of plastic in the tipping floor at Sims every single day. And that room is never, ever empty. It's emptied out and then refilled again.
So as a designer and an artist, I think that the scope of the problem we have right now if we change the perspective a little bit and just think of it as an opportunity, and sort of using the current situation to dictate our palette of materials or resources, that's how I look at it. It's not like, oh, I want to solve the plastic problem. It's I want to make a chair. What do I have around that's really cheap, and that is otherwise a problem? So for me, it's just like a supply closet of materials to work with that happen to be detrimental because of their volume. So specifically using them.
Thanks so much. And of course, my next question is about opportunities. So I love the fact that it already comes up. But actually, I might turn it to you, Kara, next. With developments over the last 2 years, when China decided to no longer take outside waste, particularly plastics and some other waste, as the economy and production has grown, to produce sufficient amount of plastic internally for recycling. Also, there's issues to do with the quality of the material that we have been shipping to China. First, I'm curious, how has that shown up in your work at Sims, and how has that shown up? And
Sure.
I do have then a follow-up question to everybody, but let's start with that.
Cool. And I might have to say something about opportunity and coming out of this as well. So Sims, and by way of that, all of New York's recyclables are recycled plastic. I'll focus on. We were not selling to China. So when China initiated a national sword, which was basically China saying, we don't want your low quality plastics and your paper recycling anymore, United States, after we had been sending much of it to them for a very long time. And they said, no, we don't want that anymore. So we at Sims were not directly affected by that because they were not our customers. We were not selling our plastics to China or our paper. But many other MRFs across the country were deeply affected, and because of that, the market has been affected. And so we've been affected not directly, but because of the shifts in the market. But then I have to say the thing about opportunity, because we were shipping all of this stuff to China, and then it was unchecked there. We were shipping low quality materials. They were probably using some of it, but we don't know what they were doing with all of it. So now this regulation, yes, it's kind of throwing some of the recycling industry up in arms, and there are these terrible articles saying recycling is dead. I assure you it is not dead, so tell all your friends it's not. It's just an opportunity for us to handle our own waste here in this country and develop infrastructure and create jobs and, maybe even become more aware of all the waste we are creating, because we have to stare at it and deal with it. We can't just send it overseas and forget about it.
Thank you, and that was actually an answer to my follow-up question as far as at least you were concerned, because I fully agree. I think the opportunity there is to for us as a community and as a country as well to engage with the issue rather than kind of just send it off somewhere. But Arta and Kim, maybe just building on this, connected to this, to what Kara just said, how do you see sort of other possibilities for us to deepen our relationship with plastic, even at the level of individual, but also, Arta, you could say maybe something about an institution like the New School and Parsons, and then Kim, maybe within the sort of broader art and design community as well. Because Kim, you also talked about the stigma with the material, and yet it lends itself beautifully to these delicious looking things. As I said before, my follow-up question was on opportunity, and then of course everybody came up with opportunity. What's the kind of, on a community level, and speaking to your specific communities, what's the opportunity at the community level?
So I think the opportunity is that when we start looking at something not as a problem but as a resource, it completely changes our perspective. I know, Dave, you and I have joked about that when we look at a plastic bottle now, we're like, ooh, we could make this out of it. Or, like, this is a great color to use. So it's just like thinking about plastic as a resource has completely changed my perspective, in just how I look around and what I see. And if I think a piece of trash will turn into a beautiful product or has a nice translucency that I want to use. So I think if we, I don't know, treating things like a material and a resource instead of a stigma might be a good approach to start, at least from my perspective.
So I'm going to step back a little bit before I get to the particularity of the question. I have been following the situation with China because, to be honest with you, I have very little faith in the way that, especially the way we are running the government and what are our priorities. So what really has happened, the backlash has been that still we are sending things out. So the 50%, 45% to be precise, was going to China. Now, out of the 45% is gone. Now, so what we are doing with that? Right now, we are sending them to incineration, we are sending them to landfill, and rest of it is still going out of US, but to the countries that don't have the infrastructure to deal with our stuff, right? So when it comes down to the concept of, okay, we are providing jobs, fantastic, but then there needs to be an appropriate infrastructure to actually support this stuff that we are just spitting out, right? And ultimately, that comes down to designing policies that incentivize these type of solutions. And I think there's a very, as you mentioned, I think in your talk, is a very creative one, right? How we can actually put the right type of incentive to actually start spawning out and figuring out the ways in which we are recycling plastic or any other material. For example, glass is a very hard material to actually, we don't have the right infrastructures in US to be able to actually reuse that. And it's a very precious material, right? That being said, I think if I want to actually map out the process of where does it make sense to use plastic? I think it's very similar when we are discussing energy issues. It's absolutely absurd if we are thinking about, I'm going to use electricity to heat up a place. That's a high quality energy. You don't use it simply for low quality type of use. Similarly, we need to be thinking about plastic in the same way. So when is the right time? What is the right task to actually, you can then thinking about, I'm going to use the plastic for? And I think the right scale for that comes down how long I'm holding on to something if I'm actually creating material that we don't know how long it's going to last. So what is the life equivalency in that, right? So that I think there is this cultural level we need to really discuss. How we are relating to this material, and what's the life quality of that material, how fast I'm going to throw it out. And then we can think about, all right, as designers, we have this abundance of material, how we can tap into the resources for that as such, but at the same time thinking about alternative material and start testing that. Because ultimately, I think what SS has been, Sustainable System has been really good at is trying to teach our students that you don't need to use the conventional material. Actually, using a material that hasn't been tested, it gives you a leverage, compared to your peers. So start thinking out of the box and bringing other palettes and other materials to discover perhaps some of the tasks that we were even thinking. I'm thinking about mycelium, right? It's a very powerful material to actually use for sculpting, for packaging, for fires. There are so much qualities about that. So I think in an academic institution, that's one of the things we need to be thinking about, how we can actually introduce this material properly at the right time. And more importantly, creating within the institution, looking ahead and knowing we are going to that direction, provide the right infrastructure. So it's still our making center, in a way, still has that kind of a conventional equipment and spaces that is attached to the old material. Now, of course, Dave knows the complexities around that. So biomaterial is the same thing. So what are the new spaces we need to actually allow our students to investigate and play around and learn?
Great, thank you. And I love panels like this. I've moderated a lot of panels over the years, and the best kind of panel is when the panelists are answering the next question, which you're doing with every single answer, because it keeps me on my toes. And I sincerely say that it's the best kind of panel to moderate, because it keeps it dynamic and moving forward. I am having to think on my feet a lot, which is I actually enjoy that challenge. So thank you. But actually, Arta, you started to touch on this a little bit, and Kara, in your presentation, you touched on this too. There are different levels of plastic and lots of different uses that we, design plastic for. For example, plastic in prosthetics or in a pacemaker is kind of seen as good or better, than maybe a single-use plastic. And our focus is on the unnecessary consumption of single-use within the disposable culture that we sort of find ourselves today. And Kara, you actually acknowledged in your presentation also that there is no way. I mean, we use language like we throw something away, but there is actually no way. Well, we saw one of the ways in your presentation. But how do we address the differences in use in plastic? And then a kind of a broader question, but very much connected, is how do we start to change culture? Because if you look at just your individual use of an engagement with single-use plastic through an average day, they really are everywhere. And this is something I think about a lot in just my daily life. But how do we start to change culture? That's my underlying question. But from your perspectives also, how important is it to address the different kinds of uses for plastic?
With that. So I think there's definitely some plastics that are incredibly helpful, like those in, medical, going out for medical uses. And I think that's going to come down to design and innovation again when we can finally, maybe find a different material that's less disposable. I don't know. But what I do know is that there are types of plastic that are going to be more easy to tackle and slowly get out of our daily routine. And we're doing that slowly but surely, California is ahead of us as usual, but we're banning the single-use plastic bags. Maybe we'll get rid of utensils. I think it's going to be a slow process in tackling what we can, and then getting deeper and deeper into, the items that are maybe just more necessary or have more serious purposes. I feel like there was another question.
Yeah, the kind of unanswerable question is how do we change culture? Yeah,
I think awareness. I think as we see it accumulate more around us, and even something like China, even though there's a lot of, maybe misinformation or sensationalized information, it's making people think more about waste and about recycling, and about where we send it all. So just that awareness. Hopefully it will start to change the culture.
Okay, so I think a cultural shift happens on a generational level. So it's, like Kara, what you're doing with educating really young kids about what a landfill looks like is super important. But for generations who may be more resistant to change or to accepting the fact that our landfills are filling up with plastic, I think a cultural shift is much more difficult. And I think maybe that's where some of the bioplastic or easily degradable material comes into play as sort of a Band-Aid solution until we just stop using those single-use items altogether. So it's not, it's not the best solution, but I think it could potentially help.
It's like a stepping stone to something Bioplastics are not the answer either. Not yet. Maybe one day they will be.
I agree that needs to be definitely staged and phased. So education, if you're thinking about from the youth and we are building up education and then mass awareness, really bringing that to the front and actually talking about that very openly. I think as society we have a very difficult time. As soon as things gets ugly and hard to talk about, makes people really uncomfortable, so we just don't really dig into it. So I think it has to be painful discussions around it. We need to make sure that, and we have this, this is I think what I noticed the most, we actually in these bubbles that all of us are aware and we are highly active, and then we are talking to each other, right? In a way, I feel like it's very important, and maybe this is the government or more of a larger effort within the country that these issues needs to be brought up. Policy then becomes a very important role in these topics. But at the same time, I think when all that is said, also we need to really think about creating nudges. So, for example, today we literally had a discussion how hard it is if we want to avoid purchase a bottle of water because there is no water fountain around, right? So how we can actually then think about the design of the urban fabric, how we can create spaces that people are not, they have an incentive. It will be easy for them to actually access the things. And every single of us, all of us have that experience. We purchase something and we really need it and we're like, oh, the guilt. There is that built up to it. So if we are creating feedbacks that people can feel, all right, if I'm having an empty bottle, I can go and refill it very easily. Recycling, why it's so difficult? So how we can actually think about designing buildings that make the process easy, that makes the cleaning easy. So one of the projects that I showed you, the students really thinking about once you're done, how you can disassemble this and put it in the right buckets, right? So there are all these things that we can be thinking about to meaningfully have a positive impact and have everybody on board instead of expecting, why not you're doing such a hard, you have 500 things in your list, but you need to worry about one more and go out of your way. It shouldn't be out of the way. It should be simple. And that is, I think, where our design power lies, right? To actually be creative and really taking notes of the moments we can introduce the right solution at the right time to make the process easy for everybody.
Thanks so much. I find also when I moderate these things that there is never enough time for audience questions at the end. So I'm going to ask one more question off the panel, and then we're actually going to turn it to you so that you can ask questions of the speakers, especially after their presentations earlier. I'm sure you have many. I'm going to end with a question that hopefully points to sort of inspirational futures, and also I'd love to hear from you, like what gives you hope in these conversations. But my question is, and Kim, I loved when you made the connection between design and public policy and the kind of the shared problem solving in both, because that really resonated with me. I've not been involved in public policy directly, but I've here and there worked with policymakers, and I share that view as well. But connected to that, what would be your vision of a future? And this may look very different for all three of you, or may be very similar, but what's the kind of future that we should be working towards as far as plastic are concerned, in your view? And then I always ask about hope, because I think it's really important in this world. What gives you hope?
I have the mic, I will start. I mean, I just dream of a future where we have reusable items, where reuse is the norm. You know, I have my reusable water bottle. I have my reusable bag. We have the same reusable bag, Timo and I, the 0 by 30 DS1Y bag. I think that something like that will indeed take a long time, as we are this disposable culture. But to me, that seems like the obvious future. And I get hope from working with the kids, thank you for reminding me that I do that. But they have such neat ideas. And, yesterday I was with a class of third graders and fourth graders, and they're like, well, why can't we just do this? Why can't everyone just drive Teslas? Well, let's talk about that. Crazy kid ideas, but I love talking to them and saying it's so wonderful that you have these ideas, because you can look at ideas that other people have had and build on them, build on what's working and what's not working. And when I see them excited about, just thinking stuff up and trying stuff, then I think, oh, okay, maybe we'll be okay. Like, these young people are excited to just get their hands dirty and try stuff, try to find solutions. That's my hope.
Thank you. That's why I've been teaching for 16 years.
Yay.
Of course, it's. I think the students. Those are the ones that are giving me, and I think all of us here, hope. So, in a way, what I actually am very pleasantly surprised. I'm seeing that within design world, we are taking things very seriously at this point. It's not this. I want to say. Even 5 years ago and 6 years ago, I was not seeing this level of momentum within the design community and the education of designers. Even us really owning up that, all right, we are designers, we need to really rethink these issues. The way we are going to teach our students are going to be different. But also we are, and this is, I think that's why it becomes even more serious. We are trying to be solution providers, and we're not shying away from the concept of, okay, this is too it's not design, like this is not art, this isn't, we are really trying to get to the technical, the bottom line of that. We're trying to actually deal with the science of things. And to me, there has been, and I think there is a stigma, but this idea of like, you are either a designer or you're a technical person. So the science belongs to another world and designers, it belongs to another. I am seeing little by little these boundaries are changing. And because of that, when you have two groups of very different mindset with a totally different skill sets come together and start like talking, those collaborations actually creates the solutions. So I think we are doing a good job of planting the right seed. It takes a little while for our students to become the agents. They are still in training. But ultimately, seeing the way we are training them now, it makes me very hopeful for the way we are approaching the crisis we are in right now.
Yeah.
So that's a good question. I think this kind of event, I think the work that I see, like at Milan, that's a little bit experimental right now, that all gives me hope. People who are exploring materials and being really creative about it, and then using those materials in applications that are really appropriate. So giving, more consideration to what we're using for what kind of object, I think is super important going forward. And like Arta mentioned, that's a decision process that's truly interdisciplinary. So the more we can talk to each other, probably the better. I have a lot of hope for the future. I think we have a lot of awareness about what's going on, and it's growing, and we have a lot of really creative people who are pushing this movement, and it's getting a lot of momentum.
Great. What a perfect way to end the moderated question. So thank you all three. And with that, I would like to open it to you. And just because we are filming, it would be very, very helpful if you can speak to the microphone, because that's the only way that the question will actually get recorded. So we have a roaming mic. Thank you.
Hey guys. Okay. So I kind of missed the beginning part. So if I ask a question and you guys addressed it in that, I'm very sorry. But I spoke to one person up there, and I have like a business myself that's repurposing recyclable materials that were not going to be recycled in the first place. And so right now, the products that we make and sell are mostly kind of home decor items. That's just an extra detail. But anyway, so would you guys have any advice, thoughts, anything on, I know the environmental movement, plastic, just education on our waste system and our waste management and stuff is gaining momentum, but would you have thoughts on how to marry that with business in a way? Because that's sort of, for me, I went to NYU. They taught me a little bit about environmental studies, and I just think that's where the future has to go, like business and environmentalism married. So if you have any suggestions, thoughts, anything, that's cool.
I mean, it's kind of becoming a hot topic, or it's becoming attractive now to be creating things out of recycled content, like just that as a brand, or somewhere, in advertisement on your product. I think that's going to become more desirable. So if that's what you're doing, I mean, that's going to work for you, for sure.
I would agree with that. To be honest, working with recycled materials is a lot more expensive than working with non-recycled materials. It takes a lot more time and a lot more money. From a business perspective, right now, it doesn't make sense. The only thing that makes sense is that customers like the story. So in a lot of cases, they're willing to pay for the story or to pay for the fact that they think that they're being more ethically responsible with their purchases, which they are. So because you're creating specifically out of non-recycled materials, you have to let people know that you're doing that, because that's why they're going to be purchasing them. You can never make something cheaper than another person. It's just a race to the bottom. So from a business perspective, just, be really open about the story and the ethical reasons about why you're doing what you're doing.
I'm not sure my response would be particularly helpful. Being an architect, I deal with the energy performance. So, in a sense, for me, I follow policy. So right now we are going to see much tightening on the energy performance of the building. So as soon as that kicks in, there is a particular demand that rises up. So if you can actually so if you're noticing there is a policy that has basically, it's going to hit and create a particular demand, I think those are the moments that you can identify gaps, and then you can actually think about, all right, how I'm going to situate myself, how I would situate my business to take most advantage of this particular ride that is lifting, right? So that's the...
This question is for Kim. As a designer working with upcycling material, how do you go through the process of creating a product and kind of get over the inhibitions of just creating more stuff?
That's really hard. It's really hard. I mean, the first piece I ever made was just cast out of regular resin, and someone saw it on my Instagram and wanted to buy it, and I sold it to them, and then I couldn't sleep because I was I literally just bought new material to make this thing, and that they don't need, because there's, the world is full of chairs in everyone's basement and on the side of the road. So do we really need another? I don't know. So the way that I sort of kind of balance my compulsion to make things is by trying to do it as responsibly as I can. And if I can't, if there's no more plastic to use, I'll stop making these chairs. I'm totally okay with that. And I'll find a new material to work with. So for me, it's I don't know, being responsible at what I'm doing, I guess, is how I rationalize putting new objects into the world.
This question is also a little bit more directed to Kim. I was wondering, you were talking earlier about value, and how do you handle those conversations when people are asking you about the value of this product? How do we alter society's value of plastic, and how do we handle the value perceptions?
That's really tough. That's a really tough question. I don't know. I've had mixed success with it. For a very current example that I'm working through right now, I'm working with a cosmetics brand, and we're recycling their packaging into objects that they can potentially sell to their customer. And so I came up with a bunch of prototypes. We met about them, and the overarching feeling was that they didn't feel luxurious enough. Like, they didn't feel like something that the customer would pay for because they were made out of plastic, which is sort of weird because it's the same material that they chose for their packaging. It's just in a different form. So we're sort of mitigating that right now, or at least attempting to, by redesigning it, by giving it a bit more heft. It takes more material, which I have mixed feelings about, but by just trying to make this plastic material seem a bit more luxurious. I mean, in my other work, I've played on color and translucency to help it look more appealing, but it's a real challenge. I don't know if I have a good answer because I'm still working at it myself.
Thank you for being here, guys. My question's probably for Arta. You mentioned, and I'm an entrepreneur as well, so I tend to think about these issues through that lens, like what sort of business models can help have an impact and be investable and scalable, so we can actually challenge these issues the right scale here in the US, where we think about things through these lenses. And I think what you mentioned in your last answer was right on, and that, hey, if you can identify policies that are coming down the road that are going to create demand, there's your opportunity or your space for opportunity. So something like a carbon tax is going to change things, cap and trade, change things overnight in very specific areas. So I think my question for you is specific. It has to do with a specific business model, right? Because you've mentioned a lot today about infrastructure and thinking about the systems, right? So my business is a design and prototyping studio, and we're right at the in the fun space, like what sorts of things can we make using these processes. But it's a lot of the boring areas that I think maybe we can make progress in as entrepreneurs now. Things like what MRFs do, right? By pulling things out of the recycling stream and processing them and getting them ready for the next step. So I'm curious, in your mind, are there specific business models that we can start to experiment with local entrepreneurs today that can really help create a foundation for all three of your visions for the future? So specific business models.
I have done a lot of thinking in relation to architecture. I think every field, it needs to really kind of identify those kind of it's almost like leverages, right? There are series of stakeholders that you can start playing around and kind of understand them and then start pulling and pushing against, right? So recently, one of the conversation that came up, there is this digital, a platform that comes up, and we want to make it sustainable and green. And it's a digital platform on its own. It's not going to be green, right? Unless you need to think about the interface in which it's going to interact to support green. Other than that, it's a green wall. It's not real, right? So to me, all right, it's one thing that you are saying, I have this series of products, but what are the ways in which you are having that interface with your stakeholders, right? How would that look like? So that also is part of that design. So once, for example, the product went out, is this part of that story that you are bringing, you own that thing. Once you're done, bring it back to us. So there is this whole idea of as you're setting up the business, what are the ways you can be thinking to shift the paradigm to be able to capitalize in this idea of the sustainability, the system thinking, and all. I think these are the areas for us to for the next step that we need to really dig in more, because frankly, there is a lot of businesses out there that they're saying, we are sustainable, we are green, we are this and that. But when you really dig in, It's just basically a veneer. And I think we are going to be seeing more and more demand on the true way of thinking, really restructuring the way our business that is run. And that comes down to the stakeholders and how you are interacting with your customer in day-to-day basis, after life of your project, and so forth.
This is a question for Kara. One of the long-standing and fraught issues around the recycling industry for decades is, can it be self-sustaining and profitable in its own right? And the last report I had read, it still wasn't the case. This is hopefully quite outdated now, but it still wasn't profitable really in a self-sustaining way for recycling plastics or metals. And surprisingly, it was recycling paper that had proven to be profitable. And I was wondering if you could provide an update on where that is today.
Sure. So my understanding is that right now it is, I think you mentioned this as well, yes, it is cheaper to make plastics out of virgin raw materials rather than the recycled materials. But what we're seeing are programs like Demand Champions, where corporations are making commitments to use a certain amount of recycled content in their materials, in whatever they're making, because of, there's some draw in that. It's going to make them, look environmentally conscious. Is it greenwashing? Yeah, maybe a little bit. But it's going to help recycling stay alive. Also, extended producer responsibility. So those producers putting in the commitment to manage the disposal of their materials. So whatever they create, they're investing in the MRFs or in the municipalities to then be responsible for that waste management. So it might not just be the MRFs that are going to make it economically sustainable. It's going to take help from really all pieces of the pie if it's going to work.
Thank you. And thank you all. And with that, please join me in thanking our amazing speakers. You've left me hopeful and inspired, so thank you.